out of Northcom's J36. So if you paid attention for the last 3 years, this is about our third naming convention for the J36. Well, Standing Joint Force Headquarters evolved over to the J3, where we were J3 DOMs, and now we're J36. Pretty much handling the same functions as we did as the Standing Joint Force Headquarters, inculcating ourselves into many of the states in order to try and work some of the dual status command initiatives, along with some of the other initiatives in concert with the states. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take about 15 minutes, which I guess now I have about 45 minutes, to talk about 7 slides. And really this is a primer. So really some of the contentious issues might evolve out of the working group that we had this afternoon. But I really just kind of give a baseline so we have a general understanding of this dual status command initiative. Really, I'm going to talk about the 5 W's, if you will. What is this thing, and how do we really wrap our arms around it? I'm going to start, not to insult your intelligence, but this is a very simplistic diagram, obviously. Some would argue that the dual status command program has been in existence since about 2004. I would argue that it's been in existence, but really it's been surrounded by national special security events, such as the ENC, RNC, the Republican and Democratic Convention. That's really where we've seen the genesis of the dual status command initiative evolve out of. So that's where it dates back to 2004. Anything outside of that in the emergency management arena is really what you find in a parallel chain of command, where you have a distinct Title 32 chain of command and a distinct Title 10 chain of command. So here in the last 2 years or so, we've started taking from what was born out of the national special security events, and we have tried to evolve that more into how do we replicate this now in an emergency management type of environment. And that's really what the Dual Status Commander program is all about. It is taking the Title II side from the governor through the tag down into a command designee, usually out of the state, and then adding to that the authorities that come with the Title X side, from the president to the SecDef, down to that same commander. And much like was just pointed out by Colonel Valentine, really what we're trying to get after is this thing called unity of effort. Not unity of command, but unity of effort. That unity of effort starts with the dual status commander, where they have the authorities given through the Title 32 chain as well as the Title 10 chain, through the command and control, for lack of a better term, National Guard forces as well as Title 10 forces. Gives them those authorities. Really, there is one person in that chain of command that has the authorities to command those forces, and it is the dual status commander. I'm going to show you a diagram here in just a few minutes that really talks about the subordinate organization, or the organization from the dual status commander as it emanates down. And really what we're going to talk about from the standpoint of command authorities is that the command stops with that dual status commander. There's one person that's been given those authorities, and it is the dual status commander themselves. I know there's at least one in here. I saw Colonel Spano from California, and we have worked with California as a state, not exclusively, but on a repetitive basis to try and mature some of these processes. All right, where is our doctrine today? Some of you might have seen a GAO study that came out about 18 months ago, a year ago, that really talked about the deficit in some of our doctrine. This is green suit as in DoD type doctrine. There is not a whole lot of doctrine that covers the dual status command initiative at this point. Back in March 2011, there was a joint action plan that was developed that started talking some of the language that we've seen with respect to this unity of effort. So the Council of Governors got together and they agreed upon the fact that this makes sense from a unity of effort standpoint. To follow that up, it's now been put into law. The National Defense Authorization Act of FY12 has now codified the fact that it is the usual and customary command and control arrangement for most of these scenarios. So whether that be a national special security event or whether that be some kind of emergency response event, this is the usual and customary arrangement that we would like to see from a unity of effort standpoint. The one thing that I would note, though, is you are not going to find a whole lot of supporting doctrine, i.e. Joint Publication 3-28. We were just now including in that document during this rewrite that's currently going on some language that speaks to the dual status command initiative. It might have been mentioned in there previously, but it really wasn't codified to any great degree. So there are joint publications that are just now coming out with some more information, let alone we're still in draft form for a Department of Defense instruction that speaks to some of the language and some of the particulars of the Dual Status Command Initiative in that document. All right, I am an engineer, so I had to put at least one graph up here. On the left-hand side, you see the probability. And the probability is talking about what is the probability of an emergency event happening. So something like Florida, we're talking about hurricanes, something like Florida would be a high propensity for hurricanes, for instance, as opposed to Idaho, perhaps. Probably not such a high propensity for something like a hurricane. So you have a spectrum on the left-hand side. Along the x-axis here, the severity. And what is the severity? We start with a local response all the way through a federal response. The Dual Status Command Initiative really is going to tend more towards the spectrum of a high severity type of event, i.e. a Sandy storm, if you will. So the challenge that I would throw out at you is where do we prepare for that high propensity or that dual status commander type of event? We don't prepare for it during the event. What we call phase zero in our phase zero training is where we really need to prepare for that. And that's why I mentioned California as an example. We go out on a reoccurring basis in order to train with the likes of California and many states that are represented here today, in order to try and train through the mechanisms and the authorities and some of those command and support relationships as we work through the training event, because it is not intuitive that a state has Title X forces move into their formation and start working through some of the semantics of not only a staff, but how do we command and control forces, or how do we work through having these forces in our formation within the state, and some of those nuances that we perhaps have in the likes of Iraq or Afghanistan are not the same once we get into a sovereign state. So we work through some of those semantics. So this chart's really talking about not only the probability of where we would have a dual status command construct initiated, but the fact that really we need to prep for that in phase zero. We need to prep for that today in order to be able to actuate that and really coherently work through all the nuances of the dual status command initiative today here in Anonymous. All right, the chart may be a little bit confusing, but I'm going to walk through systematically the numbers that you see up here. So the first thing that we have is we have memorandums of agreement. And those memorandums of agreement are between the federal and the state side. So all but one state right now and the District of Columbia are in the works, if not already have memorandums of agreement, where it lays the foundation that the governor has agreed that in the event of an emergency situation, we at least have the underpinning of an agreement that states that we're going to move forward with a named person or a named designee in order to be in charge of this dual status command. The second bullet up here then talks about the governor issuing an appointment letter. And I would argue that coincident with that, you have the president and the SecDef working in the same vein to try and make sure that they agree on the federal side that this designee is indeed the person who is going to be appointed as that dual status commander. So if you look at the threes, there's one on the top and one on the bottom. The threes talk about the collaboration that goes on between the governor and the president, or the governor and the SecDef, and then on the bottom there it talks about the collaboration that's going on between the TAG, General Bassett at GB, and General Jacoby. All these could happen coincident with each other, all of them could happen on one telecom. There isn't necessarily one way, but this is kind of a textbook solution. At the end of the day, the outproduct of that is going to be the consent by the governor that they have designated one person to command and control this formation, and then on the other side, the authorization that comes usually from SecDef, but it's relegated down from the president to the SecDef in order to give you a designee, which is that dual status commander. Right now, within the halls of Northtown, we're working on some language. There are some contentious issues that emanated out of society about, when is a dual status commander activated, when are their authorizations in order to command and control formation, when are they legitimate. So we are working on some language to codify exactly what those gates are, because along with those gates comes some monies, along with those gates comes some authorities. So we're trying to make sure that in doctrine, when the doctrine is written at the Department of Defense level, that language is codified in those documents. All right, I am not going to kill you necessarily with line and wire diagrams, so what I did was I took my line and wire diagram from Afghanistan, I just cleaned it up, and I just started throwing names in here. This is really confusing at the end of the day, is the point I'm trying to get at. At the end of the day, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the state side, which is pretty simplistic for most of you because most of you live that. The governor down to the tag to a joint force headquarters at the state level. But in parallel with that, we have a Title 10 side. So from the president, the command structure goes down to SecDef, and then ultimately down to Northern Command, General Jacoby. Where I want to get to is this dual status commander. So there is as much coordination that goes on as there is command authorities here. So we have the state side, we have the federal side, and ultimately we want to get down to the authorities. One of the things, or one of the points that I would like to make here, is that that dual status commander who's used to perhaps answering to the tag is now answering to two commanders. They're answering to their state side, back up to the governor, really through the tag, but they're also answering to the U.S. Northern Command. U.S. Northern Commander, General Jacoby, may decide that he's going to put an operational level headquarters between. Precedence over the last 12 to 18 months has shown that that operational headquarters would in fact be far north or the J-Flick. And we've seen that become almost precedence, I would argue. And that's denoted by this box here. And at Northcom, the reason why that box doesn't outright say J-Flick is by virtue of the fact that right now 7 different courses of action, it's really 4 courses of action with a couple of sub-courses of action, are being studied with respect to what the command and control structure should look like. And really all indications are that General Jacoby is going to be offered a menu of options to choose from. Although going back to that graph, I would argue that if that graph tends more towards the less severe side, that there probably is going to be some decision as to what is the common everyday command structure look like as opposed to a complex type of catastrophe. Some of the planners within Northcom study the complex catastrophe and really take it to the extreme by looking at the New Madrid scenario, where you might have 8 states involved in a complex type of catastrophe. What is the command structure in that? It's going to be quite different than if you have a forest fire in one individual state. So there's many options that are being offered up to General Jacoby, but I would argue to you that precedence would suggest that this more often than not has become the J-Flick. So where does the DCO, FCO, and SCO kick into this problem set? Well, this triad is more often than not working inside the Joint Field Office. You'll notice that there's a coordination line. One of the things that when the Title 10 forces go and enable a state headquarters or a state JTF, we help bridge that gap by perhaps having somebody like the J3 guy, the future ops, plugging directly into the DCO to make sure the communication gap between that JTF or the dual status command headquarters and the DCO is really solid. We get to know a lot of the DCOs real well and understand their DCE, their coordination element from a standpoint that we try and bridge the gap between communication. The Title 10 deputy is born out of the J36 at Northcom. That is the program manager, if you will. They come from across Northcom currently. And these Title 10 deputies build relationships at the state level. So that way during phase 0, we can train as we fight, so to speak. And they go out and work through administrative and exercise type scenarios in order to make sure that in the event that an emergency happens, that Title 10 deputy and a complement staff can plug directly into that JTF headquarters and operate as if we operate every day. Right now there is 10 Title 10 deputies spread across the spectrum of the 54 states and territories, much as there's a Title 10 32 deputy from within the state that plugs into that dual status commander. The Title 32 deputy helps with the management of the Title 32 side. The Title 10 deputy obviously helps with the Title 10 side. But this collaboration here is really feeding to the dual status commander, who is the ultimate decision maker. Underneath that dual status commander, you then have subordinate task forces more often than not. Those subordinate task forces more often than not take the shape of one of 2 different methods, either geographic or functional. Functional, you might have a task force aviation and a task force engineer and a task force med. whereas geographically, some states align themselves geographically, where north of Highway 101, you have Task Force 101, which is an organic brigade perhaps. Or south of Highway 101, you might have different task forces, and geographically align themselves. So how does the Title 10 forces then inculcate themselves into these formations? Or do you end up having a dual status commander where he has 30 of these goose eggs across the bottom? The command and control is an aspect that needs to be discussed within the state, because span of control, just like downrange, is something that's a consideration. There was a slide that I saw emanating out of Sandy that showed a combat camera team in parallel with all these task forces, a 5-man combat camera team. Does that make sense to have a flat architecture like that, where you have a one goose egg, a 5-person team? Or does it make sense to embed them within this task force structure somewhere? There's some legalities that come along with that, in that the dual status commander is the only one that can issue orders. They are under orders on the Title 32 side and the Title 10 side. They're the only one that can issue orders. And at the end, how do we then get that 5-man team to answer back to the dual status commander, or even more importantly, how do they receive their orders and actuate those orders? That becomes part of the question. That becomes part of the calculus that we kind of work through with the staffs, and that's why we argue that phase 0 is as important as any of the other phases that we might work through in an exercise for real world. So one of the ways in which we've tackled that is from the dual status commander. There may be times where, for lack of a better term, we bury those Title 10 forces inside of a subordinate formation, understanding that they cannot receive orders from that task force commander. They may be a pass-through, if you will, in articulating the orders that are emanating from the dual status commander down to that smaller formation. And we work around the legalese of not being able to allow that task force commander to give orders. They may just, a cord con is a made-up term, but it is a term that we've thrown out more often than not in trying to just be a pass-through and trying to articulate those orders down from the dual status commander to that staff. Those type of staff functions are the type of things that we work through when we go out and work with some of the states. And it's not just J36 out of NORCOM. These enabling teams can emanate from the likes of Army North, or from the U.S. Transcom JEC, or from across NORCOM's formation writ large. Okay, at the end of the day though, as was articulated by Colonel Valentine, this entire formation is in support of the incident commander. So we are in support thereof. Our tasks that we get inside of this dual status commander come twofold. One is coming from the state through its chain of command, where the Title 32 chain exercises what they need to exercise in order to support the incident commander. But through the Title 10 side, we execute the Title 10 forces from the request system. Requests for assistance come through the DCO. We articulate that ultimately in a set of orders that emanate from the dual status commander, and then we articulate down to the formation support to that dual status commander. I think that's my last slide.